The first time the lone rancher thought about breaking every rule that had kept him alive, it was because of a single sentence spoken by a girl who had nothing to lose. The desert was quiet in that dangerous way, the kind of silence that made a man feel watched. The sun hung low, painting the sand in shades of fire and blood. When he noticed her standing near the dry riverbed, she didn't run, she didn't beg. She simply watched him with eyes that carried more courage than fear. The rancher had seen many faces in his years out here. Outlaws, soldiers, drifters, but never a look like hers. It unsettled him. He tightened his grip on the reins, already knowing what he should do. Right away, forget he ever saw her. Helping an Apache girl could cost him his land, his freedom, even his life. Trouble followed people like her, and he had spent years learning how to avoid trouble. But she stepped closer, dust swirling around her worn moccasins, and spoke with a calm that cut through his hesitation. "If you want to, just do it." The words were simple, almost careless, yet they struck him like a gunshot. No one had spoken to him that way in years, as if he still had a choice left to make. For a moment, time seemed to pause. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying the smell of heat and danger. He saw flashes of his past, choices he hadn't made, chances he had let slip away because fear felt safer than action. He had built his life on staying invisible, on surviving instead of living. And now this girl, hunted and alone, stood in front of him as if she could see straight through the walls he had built around himself. She didn't explain who she was or why she was there. She didn't need to. The bruises on her arms and the dust in her hair told their own story. The rancher felt something tighten in his chest, a feeling he thought had died long ago. Compassion maybe, or shame. He realized that riding away would be easy, but living with it would not. Still, fear clawed at him. He knew the land, the law, and the consequences. He also knew that once he crossed this line, there would be no turning back. The sun slipped closer to the horizon, shadows stretching long and dark. He looked at her again, and this time he saw not danger, but defiance. She was daring him to choose, daring him to be more than the quiet man hiding behind a ranch and a rifle. As night began to fall, the rancher took a slow breath. The desert held its silence, waiting to see what he would do next. The first gunshot shattered the morning silence, and with it, the life the lone rancher had carefully protected for years. He hadn't planned to pull the trigger. In truth, he hadn't even planned to stop. But when he saw the Apache girl surrounded by 3 armed men near the canyon pass, instinct overpowered caution. The bounty hunters laughed as they closed in on her, confident, careless. They hadn't noticed him yet, and that gave him one last moment to decide who he was going to be. The rancher felt his heart pounding as he watched from behind a ridge. Every rule he had lived by screamed at him to turn around. These men were dangerous, paid killers who didn't ask questions and didn't leave witnesses. Helping her meant declaring war on a world he had survived by staying neutral. His fingers trembled on the rifle, memories flooding back, faces of people he hadn't helped, moments he had chosen safety over honor. Then he remembered her voice, calm and unafraid. "If you want to, just do it." The thought burned through his hesitation. The shot rang out, echoing through the canyon like thunder. One man dropped instantly, shock frozen on his face. The others spun around, reaching for their weapons, panic replacing confidence. Dust exploded around them as bullets flew. The rancher moved without thinking, years of survival turning into precision. He fired again, forcing them back, his horse rearing as chaos erupted. The Apache girl didn't scream. She ran, fast, fearless, using the rocks and shadows like she'd done it 1,000 times before. When the shooting stopped, the canyon fell silent again, heavier than before. One bounty hunter lay wounded, the other gone, fleeing into the desert. The rancher lowered his rifle slowly, his ears ringing, his breath uneven. He had crossed the line. There was no denying it now. He rode down toward her, unsure of what he would find. Fear, anger, accusation. Instead, she stood tall, dust on her face, eyes locked on him with a strange mix of surprise and understanding. "You didn't hesitate," she said quietly. He wanted to tell her that fear had nearly One, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was nod. He felt different, lighter and heavier at the same time, as if something inside him had broken open. The Apache girl stepped closer, her gaze steady. "They'll come back," she warned. "And next time they won't be careless." The rancher looked toward the open desert, already knowing she was right. The land he once trusted now felt unfamiliar, dangerous. By choosing her, he had chosen a path that led away from comfort and toward consequence. As they mounted their horses and rode together into the rising sun, he understood one thing with absolute clarity. The unthinkable wasn't what he had done. It was what he was willing to do next. The rancher didn't realize how much he had lost until he saw his own home through the eyes of someone who had never been allowed one. They reached his ranch just before nightfall. The sky bruised purple and red, the kind of colors that warned of hard choices ahead. The Apache girl studied the land quietly, the small wooden house, the fenced corral, the worn tools leaning against the wall. To him, it was a place of routine and solitude. To her, it was shelter, stability, something precious. That realization unsettled him more than the gunfight had. They spoke little as darkness settled in. The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows on the walls. She told him fragments of her story. How soldiers had driven her people from their land, how bounty hunters followed her like ghosts, how survival meant never staying in one place too long. The rancher listened, his jaw tight. He had always believed staying out of conflict kept him safe, but now he understood that safety built on silence came at a cost paid by others. Before dawn, hoofbeats thundered in the distance. Soldiers. He felt it before he saw them, that cold tightening in his chest. They arrived with authority and rifles, demanding answers he didn't want to give. Their leader looked at the Apache girl like she was property, not a person. "Hand her over," he said flatly. "This doesn't concern you." The rancher glanced at his house. His land, the life he had guarded for years. He knew the law was on their side, and the rifles were too. For a long moment no one spoke. The Apache girl stood beside him, silent but unbowed. He realized then that this was the real test, not bullets or bounty hunters, but choice. If he obeyed, he would keep his ranch and lose himself. If he refused, he would lose everything else. His decision came quietly, but it was final. He walked past the soldiers, grabbed a lantern, and turned back toward his own home. When the flames caught, they spread fast, hungry and unforgiving. The wood crackled, sparks rising into the pale morning sky. The soldiers shouted, stunned, unsure whether to stop him or step back. The rancher didn't look at them. He watched his past burn, every fear, every excuse, every year spent hiding behind caution. Heat washed over his face, and with it came an unexpected calm. "This is my concern," he said at last, his voice steady. The Apache girl's eyes widened, reflecting the firelight. She didn't speak, but her expression said everything. As the ranch collapsed into ash, the rancher mounted his horse and held out a hand. Together, they rode away, smoke trailing behind them like a signal to the world. He had done the unthinkable, not out of anger or despair, but because some things were worth losing everything for, and some choices, once made, set you free. The edge of Apache land was marked not by fences or signs, but by a feeling, an unspoken understanding that the world changed beyond this point. The rancher slowed his horse as the terrain shifted, the air heavier with memory and meaning. He knew this was as far as he could go. Every mile behind them carried danger, and every mile ahead belonged to a life that was not his. The Apache girl stopped beside him, the wind lifting strands of her dark hair as she looked toward the distant hills where her people waited. They had not spoken much since leaving the burning ranch behind. Words felt small compared to what had already been sacrificed. The rancher's name would soon be whispered with anger and disbelief. Soldiers would hunt him, neighbors would call him a traitor, and the land he once called home would never welcome him back. Yet standing there he felt no regret, only clarity. For the first time, he had chosen meaning over comfort, action over fear. She turned to face him, her expression calm but searching. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said. It wasn't accusation, it was truth. He met her gaze and thought of the life he'd lived before she spoke those simple words by the riverbed. a life of hesitation, of watching the world pass without him. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." Saying it aloud felt like a promise he intended to keep. For a brief moment, neither moved. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Then she placed her hand over her heart, a quiet gesture of respect and gratitude. "Freedom always asks for a price," she said softly. "You paid yours," he nodded, understanding that freedom didn't mean safety or certainty. It meant ownership of one's choices, no matter the cost. She turned toward her land, toward a future shaped by struggle and resilience. The rancher watched her walk away, knowing their paths were splitting for good. When she reached the ridge, she looked back once, her silhouette framed against the rising sun. He tipped his hat, a small, wordless farewell. As he rode in the opposite direction, the weight of the unknown settled over him. He had no home, no protection, no clear destination. But the fear that once ruled him was gone. In its place was something stronger, a quiet courage born from doing what felt right when it mattered most. The desert stretched ahead, harsh and unforgiving, yet full of possibility. The rancher rode on, no longer defined by what he had lost, but by the choice that had finally set him free.